In a quiet corner of the city, where the scent of solder and ozone hung in the air, Elijah Vance worked wonders with his hands. They were hands that knew the language of circuits and steel, calloused from labor but deft as a surgeon's. His small repair shop, crammed with diagnostic equipment and the ghosts of machines he'd brought back to life, was his sanctuary. It was here, amidst the humble chaos, that he was raising his 7-year-old daughter, Maya. She was a sunbeam in his world of wires, her crayon drawings of smiling robots taped to the side of a hulking oscilloscope. Her laughter was the only metric of success that mattered to him. Across the city, in a tower of glass and chrome that pierced the clouds, Eleanor Sterling measured success in quarterly earnings and market share. Her world was one of silent, carpeted corridors, of boardrooms that smelled of expensive leather and ambition. Her hands, flawlessly manicured, signed contracts that shifted economies. She was the CEO of Sterling Medical, a titan of industry, but her vast corner office felt as empty as it was large. She had a daughter, too, a fragile girl whose life was governed by the very technology Eleanor's company produced. The two worlds, one of tangible warmth and the other of sterile power, spun on, oblivious to the inevitable collision course they were on. The inciting incident arrived not with a bang, but with the polite, dismissive curl of a lip. It was at the annual Tech Innovation Expo, a sprawling event where corporate giants scouted for talent. Elijah, encouraged by a friend, had secured a small, overlooked booth. On a simple table lay his invention, a handheld device of his own design, its casing pieced together from salvaged parts, its screen small but clear. He called it the Resonator. Eleanor Sterling, trailing an entourage of sycophants, was making a ceremonial tour. She stopped before his table, her gaze sweeping over his device with unconcealed disdain. "And what is this supposed to be?" she asked, her voice carrying an edge of bored amusement. Elijah's heart beat a steady rhythm of calm. He had faced down bigger fears than a dismissive executive. "It's a bioharmonic diagnostic tool, ma'am," he explained, his voice even and respectful. "It uses phase-variant frequencies to detect subsurface material fatigue in medical implants, specifically microfractures in polymer casings before they can lead to catastrophic failure." One of her vice presidents snickered. "So, a stud finder for pacemakers?" Eleanor's lips formed a bloodless smile. "Our multi-million-dollar imaging suites seem to handle that just fine, Mr. Vance," Elijah supplied. "With respect, they don't. They test for known failure points. This finds the ones you don't know exist yet." She picked it up, her manicured fingers a stark contrast to the device's unpolished shell. It felt insignificant in her hand. A toy. "A noble effort for a garage project," she said, her tone a final, public judgment. "But in the real world, we rely on proven science, not wishful thinking." She placed it back on the table, a gesture of complete dismissal, and moved on, the wake of her departure filled with the quiet, condescending laughter of her team. Elijah stood alone at his booth, the sting of public humiliation sharp but fleeting. He looked at a picture of Maya taped to his laptop. He knew what he had built. The world's validation was not a currency he traded in. Weeks turned into a month. The memory of the expo faded for Eleanor, another minor event in a life of major decisions. Then her world fractured. Her daughter, Lily, a bright but delicate 10-year-old, collapsed during a piano lesson. Lily's life was sustained by a Sterling Sentry 7, the most advanced pediatric pacemaker on the market, Eleanor's flagship product. At the city's most exclusive hospital, a team of specialists gathered, their faces grim. Every diagnostic test, run on Sterling Medical's own state-of-the-art machines, came back with the same infuriating result. The pacemaker was functioning perfectly. Yet Lily was fading, her heartbeats growing erratic, her body rebelling against an invisible enemy. Eleanor stood behind a wall of glass, watching her daughter lie small and still in a vast, sterile room. The power she wielded, the empire she commanded, was useless. The machines she sold to the world as infallible were failing her. Her fiancé and company COO, Marcus Thorne, stood beside her, his hand on her arm a gesture of proprietary comfort she found irritating. "The doctors are the best in the world, Eleanor," he said smoothly. "They'll figure it out, but they weren't figuring it out." Desperation gnawed at the edges of her composure. And then, a memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. A man with grease-stained hands and quiet confidence. A crude-looking box. Defines the ones you don't know exist yet. The thought was absurd. A Hail Mary born of pure fear. But it was the only thought she had left. Swallowing a lifetime of pride, she turned to her assistant. "Find me the man from the expo. The one with the resonator. Find Elijah Vance. Now." Finding him was easy. Convincing him was harder. When Eleanor's call came, Elijah was explaining the principles of electromagnetism to Maya using a battery and a nail. He listened to the clipped, urgent voice on the other end, devoid of the arrogance he remembered, now filled only with a raw, pleading fear. There was no apology, but he didn't need one. A child was sick. That was all that mattered. "I'll be there in an hour," he said and hung up. He arrived at the pristine, hushed hospital wing carrying a worn leather satchel. He had brought Maya with him. His sitter had canceled last minute, and he would not leave her. She clutched his hand, her wide eyes taking in the intimidatingly clean environment. Eleanor met them, her face a mask of controlled panic. Then Marcus Thorne stepped forward, his expression a mixture of disbelief and outrage. "Eleanor, what is this? You can't be serious. You're letting this repairman and his kid into a sterile ICU." "He is here at my request, Marcus," Eleanor said, her voice like ice. Elijah ignored him, his focus entirely on Eleanor. "Tell me everything," as she recounted the symptoms and the doctor's bafflement. Maya, sensing the tension, slipped away from her father's side. She walked to the window of Lily's room and, seeing the sick girl inside, carefully taped one of her crayon drawings to the glass. It was a picture of two little girls holding hands under a smiling sun. When Eleanor saw the simple, heartfelt gesture, a crack appeared in her icy facade. For a moment, she wasn't a CEO. She was just a mother, terrified for her child, being offered a moment of grace by another. The sight of it solidified her resolve. She turned to the head of cardiology. "Give Mr. Vance whatever access he needs." Inside the room, the scent of antiseptic was overpowering. Elijah moved with a quiet purpose that silenced the skeptical medical staff. He asked for the pacemaker's design schematics, which he absorbed in minutes. Then he took the resonator from his bag. The device, which had looked so crude at the expo, now seemed like an object of profound intention. He switched it on, and it emitted a low, resonant hum. He passed it slowly over Lily's chest. The doctors and nurses watched, their expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Marcus stood in the doorway, fuming. On the resonator's small screen, a green grid representing the pacemaker structure was overlaid with a spiderweb of pulsing red lines. The lines concentrated on a specific seal near the device's battery housing. Elijah's face was a study in concentration. "There it is," he said, his voice soft but carrying across the silent room. He turned to the chief engineer. "The polymer casing for the battery unit. You have microfractures forming along the primary stress seam." The engineer, a man with 3 decades of experience, scoffed. "That's impossible. We ran a full spectroscopic analysis. The material is sound. Our quality control is the most rigorous in the industry." "Your analysis looks for chemical breakdown," Elijah countered calmly. "It doesn't look for harmonic fatigue at a molecular level. Your device emits a specific resonant frequency. The polymer you've used under constant, long-term exposure to that specific frequency is becoming brittle. It's not leaching in measurable quantities, not yet, but it's releasing trace particulates. Lily's body is having a severe autoimmune reaction to them. It's not a cardiac problem, it's a systemic poisoning." Marcus stormed into the room. "This is an absolute farce. He's blaming our flagship product to cover for his own incompetence. Get him out of here." The doctors looked to Eleanor. It was a moment of decision. On one side was her entire corporate structure, her COO, her fiancé, and all of established science. On the other was a humble mechanic with an unproven gadget and an impossible theory. She looked at the unwavering certainty in Elijah's eyes. She looked at the red lines pulsing on his screen. Then she looked at her daughter, whose life was slipping away. "Prove it," she said to Elijah, her voice barely a whisper, but it was a command that silenced Marcus. Elijah knew their scanners couldn't detect the particulates in the bloodstream. They were too small, too diffuse. He needed another way. "I can't prove it with your equipment," he said. "But I can." He made a small adjustment to his resonator, inputting a new set of commands. "I'm recalibrating the harmonic field. Instead of detecting the fractures, it will now resonate with the specific molecular signature of the polymer particulates themselves. If they are in her bloodstream, this will light up." He passed the device over Lily's arm. The screen, which had been dark, began to glow. A faint, shimmering pattern emerged, tracing the path of her veins. It was undeniable. The poison was in her. A collective gasp went through the room. The chief engineer stared, his face pale. Eleanor felt the floor drop out from under her. The flaw wasn't just in Lily's device. It was a fundamental design flaw. Marcus had overseen the development of the Sentry 7. He had personally championed the new, cheaper polymer for the casing, citing massive cost savings. She saw it all in a sickening flash. The boosted profit margins, the glowing reports, the corners he must have cut. The man she was going to marry had knowingly, or through criminal negligence, put thousands of children, including her own daughter, at risk. The alliance was no longer tentative. It was forged in the fire of betrayal. Lily's life, and the lives of countless others, depended on them. With Lily's condition identified, the doctors were able to stabilize her by treating the autoimmune reaction, preparing her for a replacement surgery. The immediate crisis had passed, but a larger one loomed. In the sterile quiet of the hospital waiting room, the professional and personal walls between Elijah and Eleanor dissolved. He was no longer just a mechanic, and she was no longer just a CEO. They were two parents, united by a shared purpose. "He rushed it to market," Eleanor said, her voice flat with a cold rage she had never known. "Marcus, he cut the long-term testing phase to beat our competitor. He presented me with falsified data. He'll have covered his tracks," Elijah said, his mind already working on the next problem. "The digital files will be buried or erased. The paper trail shredded." "He doesn't know that we know the specific flaw," Eleanor countered, a familiar strategic glint returning to her eyes. "He thinks you're a charlatan I foolishly entertained. He's arrogant. That's his weakness." They relocated to her office, a place Elijah never imagined he'd see. While Maya napped on a plush sofa, they laid out their plan. He, with his intimate understanding of the technology, and she, with her knowledge of the corporate labyrinth, became a formidable team. He showed her how to use the resonator to pull the device's internal diagnostic logs. Logs Marcus wouldn't have known existed, which showed minute energy fluctuations consistent with the material degradation. She used her executive access to pull shipping manifests, cross-referencing the lot numbers of the faulty polymer with the dates of Marcus's falsified safety reports. The evidence mounted, painting a damning picture of greed and deceit. Their battleground would be the annual shareholder meeting in 2 days. It was the only venue public enough, with stakes high enough, to ensure Marcus couldn't escape. The ballroom was opulent, filled with the titans of finance and industry. Marcus Thorne was on stage, a portrait of confident leadership, presenting record-breaking profit projections fueled by the success of the Sentry 7 pacemaker. He was at the peak of his power. At the conclusion of his speech, as applause thundered through the hall, Eleanor walked onto the stage. The room quieted, expectant. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Your numbers are indeed impressive, but they don't tell the whole story." A murmur went through the crowd. "To help us understand the true cost of our success, I'd like to introduce a special consultant who has been instrumental in identifying a critical area for innovation." She turned. "Mr. Elijah Vance." Elijah walked onto the stage. In a simple, clean suit that felt foreign on his shoulders, he looked small against the vast corporate backdrop, but he carried himself with an unshakable dignity. The crowd whispered, wondering who this unknown man was. Marcus's smile tightened into a sneer. Elijah stepped to the podium. He didn't speak of corporate malfeasance or profits. He spoke about science, about a father's promise to his child, and about the sacred trust between a patient and the technology that sustains them. Then he explained the harmonic fatigue, the microfractures, the systemic poisoning. Marcus laughed into his microphone, a sound of pure condescension. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. It seems Miss Sterling has been taken in by this opportunistic nobody and his science fiction. There is not a shred of evidence to support these wild, defamatory claims." On the contrary, Eleanor's voice cut through the air. On the massive screen behind the stage, a live feed appeared from a camera focused on a workbench. On it was Elijah's resonator and a sample casing from the Sentry 7. "Mr. Vance, if you would." Calmly, Elijah activated his device remotely. The entire room watched as the familiar spiderweb of red lines spread across the image of the pacemaker casing on the screen. A wave of shock rippled through the audience. Before Marcus could respond, Eleanor continued, her voice ringing with authority. And this, a new set of documents flashed on the screen. The internal reports, the material substitution orders, the safety test overrides, all bearing Marcus Thorne's digital signature. It was over. The public vindication was absolute and brutal. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, his face a mask of disbelief, before security guards moved quietly onto the stage and escorted him away. In the aftermath, Sterling Medical stock took a historic plunge. But Eleanor's decisive, transparent handling of the crisis, announcing a full, immediate recall, establishing a victim compensation fund, and pledging a new era of safety and oversight, ultimately saved the company. Her reputation, once defined by ruthless efficiency, was remade in the crucible of integrity. Days later, she stood with Elijah on the balcony of her office, overlooking the city. The professional chasm between them was gone forever. "I owe you everything," she said. "My company, my daughter's life. I was wrong, Elijah. About you, about what truly matters. I want to offer you a position, Senior Vice President of Research and Development. Name your price." Elijah smiled, a warm, genuine expression that reached his eyes. He looked out at the horizon. "Thank you, Eleanor. But I'm not a vice president. I'm an engineer." A father, he made a counteroffer. "Fund a new, independent division, the Vance Institute for Ethical Innovation. I'll run it. We'll be your conscience, your failsafe. We'll build things that don't just make money, but that make the world safer. No compromises." Eleanor's answering smile was the first truly joyful one she'd had in years. Accepted. The final scene was not set in a boardroom or a workshop, but in a sun-drenched park a month later. A fully recovered Lily, her laughter bright and free, chased a giggling Maya across the grass. Nearby, on a bench, sat Elijah and Eleanor. They weren't a CEO and her star employee. They were just two people, two parents, watching their children play. The grease-stained hands and the manicured hands now rested side by side, part of a new, unspoken alliance. They had faced a crisis and, in saving a life, had built the foundations of a new one. A family forged not by blood, but by courage, integrity, and the simple, resonant truth that a person's worth is not measured by their station, but by the strength of their character. Have you ever been underestimated, your true value overlooked because you didn't fit a certain mold? This story reminds us that genius is not confined to glass towers, and that integrity is a force more powerful than any corporate ledger. The most profound innovations often come from the humblest of places, driven by the purest of motivations. Share this story if you believe that character, not credentials, is the true measure of a person.